All right, today's lesson is over comparing bits and pieces, investigation 1.3. What this is really about is equivalent fractions and the relationships that we need to realize that are occurring when we change the numerator and denominator and making equivalent fractions. So equivalent fractions are simply fractions that are equal in value but have different numerators and denominators. So for example, 2/3 and 14/21 are equivalent fractions. Okay, so and just to remind you, fractions are a way of representing a smaller than 1 or a number less than 1 or part of a whole. So what we're going to do here is we're simply going to take a look at two different fraction strips. We have a fraction strip for a half and then fraction strips for thirds. And so on the fraction strip for half, I'm going to use red ink and I'm going to model how to make this into equivalent fractions. So if I would fold this piece of paper in half on this line, I would now have 1/2 and 1/2, okay? But if I folded it in half, each half into half, I would get 4ths, okay? So now there are 4 equal parts. So we can make halves into 4ths. So that's simply multiplying those into 2. If I took each one of those and I divided them into half, I would now have 8ths, okay? And so with the half strip, we can turn halves into, and I'll shade it in with yellow here. If I only took a half of this, we now have 3 equivalent fractions. We would have had 2/4, which is the same thing as 4/8. Every time we're just multiplying it by 2. So if I took each one of those halves and I divided it in half, okay, and these aren't to scale and they're not perfect, I know, but it's okay. We can see that we now have 8 pieces out of a total of 16. So all of these are equivalent. Now let's take a look at the third. So I'm going to use blue to represent the third. So if I took one piece of paper, same size, and I do thirds, and I go into 3. Okay, so we would have 1/3. And we'll use purple to shade it in. So one of those would be equal to 1/3. Okay? And then I would divide each one of those into halves. If I cut them in half, cut each side into half, okay, I now have the fraction 2/6. Okay, so if I took each one of those and I divided it into half again, thus making each 1/6 a half, I could also make 4/12. So that's one way. The other way would be to, I'm going to use green over the same thing. So if I cut this originally into thirds, okay, so we're going to start with 1/3. We can also cut each third into thirds. So that would be there and about there. Okay, so I'll get rid of these blue lines real quick. We don't want that to confuse you. So blue line gone, 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 gone. Okay, so we are going to go back to the purple and color in 1/3, and then we're going to take that 1/3 and we're going to cut it into thirds as well. So there and about there. Now I have 3, but if I did that on each third, I would now have 9 pieces. Okay, so if we cut each third into 3, we would now get 3/9, and if I cut each one of those thirds into thirds, okay, now I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And I would have a total, because 3 times 3 would equal 9. So the relationship here is that I'd also multiply the 9 by 3, and I would have 9/27 in my whole strip. All right, so what the relationship here is we are taking, and whatever we multiply our numerator or denominator by, to get the new equivalent numerator or denominator, we are also going to do the same to the other one. So if I have the fraction 2/5 and I want to make it into an equivalent over 10, and I'm looking for a number to go here, I'm thinking, what do I do to the 5 to get it to 10? And because we are working with fractions and multiples and factors and things, we're going to use a multiplication or division when we find equivalent fractions. And we call that, when we multiply it or divide it, those are a scale factor, but we're not going to use that term a lot this year. It'll be one that reappears next year, is scale factor. So how do I turn a 5 into 10 using multiplication? Well, that answer is to multiply it by 2. So because I did it down here to the denominator to get to my 10, I also have to multiply the 2 in the numerator by 2, and now my new numerator is 4/10. 4/10 is equal to 2/5. All right, so that is a very quick crash course. Please, 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 if you are confused, watch the video again. It's pretty easy once you get the hang of it. But what you need to do before coming to class tomorrow is I want you to come up with 5 equivalents for the fraction 3/4. Okay? So before class tomorrow, on a separate sheet of paper or in your spiral, please come to class with 5 equivalents for 3/4. And you cannot use 3/4. They have to be either larger or smaller or equal to 3/4, but without using 3/4. All right, I'm going to get rid of that little period right there so you don't think it's a decimal. All right, please, please, please watch it again if you need to. Come to class with 5 different equivalents for 3/4, and that way you can compare with your classmates.